Good morning, everyone. It is, Friday, right? Thank God it's Friday. Friday, April 20th, 2018. It's the Gold Goats and Guns half hour here on YouTube. My name's Tom Luongo. I hope everybody's had a good couple of days. Been a rough couple of days for me, I will say. Getting finished with my taxes on Tuesday, and we had some baby goats on a week ago today. Greza gave us triplets, 2 boys and a girl, and one of the boys started out fine, and he got sick. Eventually, he died yesterday. So it's just been a traumatic 4 or 5 days trying to get the taxes finished, trying to keep up with geopolitics, and then stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning to feed baby goats, because at the end of the day, running a hobby farm or any kind of farm, it's not as romantic as it sounds from the outside. It's actually really so there it is. So let's get started with what I've got on tap for this week. Look through my show notes to get started. The first thing I really want to talk about is it's more important to talk about the markets than talk about the craziness of the Democrats. Yesterday, just now, I guess, got finished writing a blog post over my blog over at goldgoatsandguns.com. Talking about silver, because we had earlier in the week, we had a nice kind of breakout in silver above $17, which we've been kind of waiting for a while now. As a matter of fact, watching the silver markets for the last 9-10 months has been kind of like watching lint gather, like watching dust gather on your. It's boring, because nothing has been going on in the silver market. If you wonder why I haven't been talking about these things very much, it's simply because there's nothing to talk about. I mean, I can come on here, every other day on YouTube, or twice a week on Periscope, or even on my blog, and say, "Hey, look, nothing's happening." And the markets that I care about the most. Now, let's go over those markets, because really, as an analyst, as a financial analyst, I'm most worried about really currencies, commodities, precious metals. Most specifically within commodities, oil and gas, really what I call the strategic commodities: coal, iron, oil, natural gas, gold, silver. Those are the ones that we go to war over. Those are the ones that most impact geopolitics. Those are the ones that we have to be aware of their price movements from a kind of functional level. The others are all kind of secondary coppers on that list. Well, how I could copper out of that. But so you have to kind of keep your eye, at least a weather eye, on those things, and understand that that's part of the main reason that we have such a contentious relationship with Russia, is simply because Russia is a major supplier of all of these strategically important commodities. Just are. And then you start adding in the really important ones when you start talking about defense and aerospace. That would be aluminum and titanium, and to a lesser degree, magnesium, vanadium, yttrium. These are metals that nobody talks about. And being a former chemist, and having worked in metallurgy and in material science, I tell you that these are incredibly important metals for a lot of space age airframe stuff, that alloys that we use in airframes and whatnot. These things are very, very important. So when the Russians, for example, in response to our economic belligerence, turn around and threaten to shut off all titanium exports to the U.S., we need to stand up and listen. When we put massive sanctions on Rusal, the major Russian state aluminum producer, with the intention of destroying Rusal, because it still has some dollar-denominated debt. It's one of the few major corporations in Russia that has significant amounts of dollar-denominated debt, enough to make it hurt, or really enough to make the Bank of Russia get off of its backside and provide liquidity, which is what it did. And so ultimately, those sanctions, while they made a lot of headlines, didn't really have a lot of effect. They were able to move the markets for 24 hours or so, a week and a half ago, or 2 weeks ago, but that's really all they did. So when we're looking at these things, very important. It's very important that we understand the real impetus behind a lot of these. It's easy to get caught up in the I want to say the personalities and the history of various conflicts. And we're talking specifically now about Syria, right? How, you know, it's pretty well understood at this point that everybody who's been involved on the anti-Assad side in Syria has a significant reason why they're there. Okay, and no matter what theory you put forth about Syria, oil and gas pipelines for the Qataris and the Saudis, or Israelis and American oligarchs, for lack of a better term, power brokers who all have a stake in Genie Energy and want to develop the oil and gas assets under the Golan Heights, which is why the Israelis invaded the Golan Heights 50 years ago. I mean, we can go over all of this stuff. And then there's Iran and the worry on the part of the Israelis, and with good reason, that Iran wants them wiped out. Okay? That the animosity between Israel and Saudi Arabia and the mullahs of Iran is real and needs to be dealt with. But all of these things they're all part of the pie. They're all part of the cake, right? They're not the cake. So in any one aspect of this is not the real reason. It's just that Syria winds up being this kind of, I don't know, it's like a quiche. And all of these things are ingredients in the quiche. And at the end of the day, it's a quiche of geopolitical unrest. And then eventually, you know, we're going to find out whether or not we're going to cook this quiche properly, or we're going to burn it and destroy it. This is all of these imperatives have come together over Syria at one time. And the people who are the architects of the policy have been using various, you know, incentives to get other people on board. So I fundamentally believe it's the United States, the UK, and to a lesser extent Israel, pushing for an overthrow of the Assad government. We added in the Turks for years because they promised Erdogan that he would get to have the whole northern section of Syria in order to create a buffer zone and ensure that the Kurds never got access to the Eastern Mediterranean. They were really worried about a kind of Kurdish strip between Turkey and Syria that linked all the way back into northern Iran. This is anathema to Erdogan. The kibosh has been put on that. The Qataris wanted a pipeline into Europe. Everybody wants access into the European gas market. So did the Saudi Arabians. See it as an existential need. Saudis do, because they understand that crude oil is not their position in the crude oil market is tenuous. So getting a massive gas pipeline into Europe changes the game for them. What's happened over the last 3 years is that a lot of these incentives have been dissipated by the Russian intervention into Syria, right? So the Saudis are mad at the Russians, though they understand that they don't have any bargaining power, because they put the kibosh on the Saudis' pipeline. Qataris at first, yes, they were in the same position. Then they took a stake in Rosneft early last year as a peace offering to the Russians, and then immediately started opening up negotiations with Iran to develop the North Pars gas field and move their pipeline around Syria and into Turkey in a different way, which is what's happening. It's out there. So that's all that's going on here. And I'm perfectly reasonable in looking at it dispassionately. I understand why everybody's got a reason and a need to want to destroy Syria or defend Syria. And the real question is going to be whether or not we're going to continue this in perpetuity. The last time I was on, I said I really felt that the purpose of the airstrikes against Syria were to prolong the war in such a way as to continue to bleed Iran economically. problem with that is, and I'd say that's the reason for doing it. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be effective. It's just the reason for doing it. Because the counter argument to that is, and then China will come in and actively support Iran, which they are, by buying more Iranian oil, buying less oil from the Saudi Arabians, putting the Saudi Arabians behind the 8 ball, because who are they going to sell their oil to? Okay. Trump comes out this morning and says oil prices are too high. Well, oil prices are too high. I mean, they absolutely are, compared to, given the supply and demand situation, given the storage situation. The storage tanks in the United States are overflowing. You wouldn't believe, but the infrastructure for importing and exporting, processing all this oil that we're pulling up out of the ground is stretched to its limits. Refineries are working at capacity. The storage units are all full. I mean, people have been storing oil in port on ships and just renting ships for months on end just to store all the oil and trying to keep the price from collapsing. Not that it's collapsing, but certainly not at $68 a barrel Brent. Let's be frank and honest here. That's crazy. But at the same time, the U.S. shale market really does need oil prices well above $55, $60 a barrel. What will happen soon is that they'll stop drilling. And they'll pull less oil out of the ground at higher prices. So, oil should attenuate. And I think we're just reaching the mid-cycle. I just think we're reaching this kind of 18-month cycle peak. Fully expect to see oil weak this summer. So all of this, and so I put in the title, piece is where we're going to talk about the ECB. So I'm 11 minutes in and I have 12 minutes and I haven't even talked about the ECB. So let's do that. Because Mario Draghi came out this morning, the president of the ECB, and said, look, growth isn't as good as we thought it was going to be. No shit. We're going to have to keep monetizing debt for an indefinite period of time. Shit. Interest rates are going to stay low for as long as we can hold them. Shit. The ECB is trapped. They have been trapped forever. They're going to continue to be trapped. The Fed's going to continue raising rates in the U.S., furthering the spread between European sovereign debt and American debt, which is also going to put an upward pressure on the long end of the yield curve here in the U.S. at some point when rising interest rates start to really put a crunch on people's ability to pay back their existing debt. Right. This is one of the real problems that you have with raising interest rates and thinking that you have to raise interest rates in order to keep growth from getting out of control. It's just all this like Keynesian nonsense. Is that you make debt more expensive when you raise rates, right? Especially for people who are earning their living in something that's not dollars and then paying back their debt in dollars. So, I mean, it's part of the problem here. But here in the U.S., you've got pension systems that are screaming to have rates raised so they can invest at higher interest rates in order to not be in arrears by hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. At the same time, you've got emerging markets around the world that are saturated to the gills with non-bank foreign corporate dollar-denominated debt to the tune of something like $9 or $10 trillion of this stuff floating around out there. You got Petrobras debt in dollars at 3% coupon, but they're still earning in Brazilian reals or whatever. They still have to pay their bills in Brazilian real. So this is part of the reason why everybody wants higher oil prices, is in order to try and keep the rising interest rates from offsetting, from destroying their balance sheets, destroying their ability to service their debt. Same time, foreign central banks have been stocking up on U.S. treasuries held on reserve with the Fed in order to keep them as liquid as possible, in order to sell them into the market as quickly as possible if the dollar were to ever get off the mat. The dollar's starting to show signs of improving, which is why I'm not really all that convinced yet that this breakout in silver and or Bitcoin is sustainable. I think Bitcoin's probably more sustainable because I think a lot of the selling of Bitcoin had to do with taxes. Tax season is over here in the U.S., and so now we can move forward. I saw a great graph this morning, a tweet from a guy this morning showing where the price of Bitcoin peaked and the number of job openings in the crypto industry, and where the price is now, and the number of jobs available in the industry, and it's insane. It's the number of job availabilities has doubled, and the price has come down from 19,000 down to 8,500. I got news for you: the crypto industry isn't blinking in terms of building out an infrastructure. All that's happening here is that there are traders playing around with the price, but these guys are, have put their business plans together with Bitcoin at $1,500, Ethereum at $50. A lot of these token sale guys, put their tokens on the market at a quarter, 50 cents, sitting on massive amounts of money. They're sitting on 5-6 years worth of operating capital as opposed to 6 months to a year. Okay, so got news for you. It's just not going away anytime soon. It's what's coming next. Because, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Other things I'm going to hold those ideas for another day. So this move in silver is nice, but it's still not technically interesting. It is from a very short-term weekly perspective. Today's close above $17 today. It'll be nice. Be interesting. Not significant. It's interesting. Because 1770 is, I've got it in the article today. Links in the description to the below. And technically speaking, 1770 is where you really want to see silver move to, violate, and then try and hold on a daily, weekly, or closing basis. If that happens, then I'll be like, okay, cool, that's starting to get interesting. Now proved to me at 1820 or 50. I told people we were chatting about it with my subscribers and my audience over on Periscope last fall during the cryptocurrency bull market. I'm telling everybody from the moment Bitcoin got above $8,000, this is a great time to rotate profits out of Bitcoin and move into gold and silver. Gold and silver are treading water. They're doing nothing. Bitcoin's up 6,000 is up 600% this year. Take some of your profits. Go buy some gold coins. Go buy some silver. Right, the possibility of you losing money here is pretty high. The possibility of you losing money down there, really low. Sell high, buy low. Not like rocket science here. And I don't know how many people actually took my advice on that, but I know that a few did, and I'm glad. And I know a few didn't because they were still too enamored of crypto to make that shift. But live and learn. All bull markets and all bear markets should be played the same way. You should sell a bull market and you should buy a bear market. If you want to refine the timing to the point of being, a master trader, like, that's great. Devote your life to it and go ahead and do it. If you're going to be an average person who goes out and raises their kids and does the thing and goes to work and everything else, you're not a master trader. You're not looking at this shit 24/7. You're not following these markets like your life depends on it. I got news for you. You're not going to do very good. You're not going to be very good at it. You're a strategic investor, though, and you think strongly about various major waves of market movement. Well, then you can make some very good money with very little stress. Just, by the way, the main focus of how to build a portfolio, how to view your investment portfolio that I advocate in my investment news. With a focus on the strategic commodities, which I discussion up. Because the strategic commodities really are the most politically important commodities, and therefore are the markets that matter the most to the people who set policy and push and pull the markets. They're all interrelated. Now, they don't set the trends. Well, policy does eventually set trends. What doesn't set trends is day-to-day kind of tape painting and market, all the stuff that you hear about in the gold bug community all day long, where they complain about every time the gold drops when they think it should be breaking out, and they think, oh, the banks knocked it down again today. Well, yeah, they might have. But if it was a real bull market in gold, I got news for you. Gold would be at $3,000 an ounce, and we'd all be like smiling, and everything would be great, and there'd be 100 people in this scope. There'd be 100 people in this thing, and it'd be great. It's harder to advocate people buying at the bottom of a bear market. Harder, but that's where the real money is. That's where the real opportunity is. Because the first rule of investing is to hit them where they ain't. Go find the things that nobody else is invested in. Because nobody else is invested in, I got news for you. The price isn't at an all-time high. Volume and interest in a stock is what creates price moves, right? Tesla's learning this now. Or like invested in Tesla as some kind of cult. Why the price is insane, but nobody looks at the balance sheet. Nobody looks at their operations except rational people. Rational people wouldn't touch Tesla with a 10-foot cattle prod. Unless it was to short it. But even then, rational people know not to short Tesla because the market and the government and everybody else has been on their side. So shorting Tesla is not a great idea. Because the market's going up. It can go up far longer than you can stay solvent. All right. Which, by the way, is exactly the problem that Mario Draghi at the ECB had. These markets are going to continue. He's trying to create the trend in this market by continually keeping interest rates low and buying European sovereign debt in order to prolong for as long as possible the illusion that he, one, has it under control, and two, Europe is solvent. And that three, they can solve their problems. But the ECB has become a hedge fund for worthless sovereign debt. Someone's going to call his bluff. And they do. Katie bar the door. Part of the reason why the euro remains stronger than it should, because there's liquidity issues. Selling, and there's buying, and conversion out of bonds into euros and back. The euro staying strong is above 120 is not a function of European solvency. More of a function of a flight to cash fears than anything else. That's why he's trapped. And that's why it's not going to end well for him. All right. Last things I want to talk about this morning have to do with Russia. Because, well, because how can we go a day without talking about Russia? It's just too much fun. Aside from the fact that every day the Democrats do something dumber. And every day the laconic and droll Russians say something just unbelievably funny. Not that they did this morning. This morning, Sergei Lavrov, the great Russian foreign minister, and literally the top diplomat in the world, de-stressed everybody. And he came out and said that does not believe, or he does believe with 100% certainty, that neither the Russian nor the American military commanders will allow an all-out conflict between Russia and the United States. Now, that has been my operating principle for months on end. It was my analysis of the strikes on Syria on Friday last week, well, at least on Saturday morning, the day after the strikes on Friday night. Once I had a chance to really think about what happened, which is that General Mattis, Trump's Secretary of Defense, convinced him to not do any real damage. Now, it turns out that the strikes were designed to do more damage than they did. And kudos to the Syrian air defense crews to limit the amount of damage that was done, because the Syrian army is now attacking ISIS south of Damascus. And I'm sure that Israel is incredibly angry about it. Much of what Israel has been focused on has been, they've gotten more and more belligerent the more that Syrian army has cleaned up, has come closer to home, right? So when they were out fighting in Aleppo, it wasn't a big deal. You didn't hear a lot of noise about Israeli airstrikes on Iranian positions because there wasn't a lot going on close to Israel. So Aleppo, fine. Retaking Palmyra, retaking Dor, all that stuff. Very little going on from the Israelis, really. But once the once the fight started to come closer to Israel, once we started talking about Eastern Ghouta, we were starting talking about Homs, starting to talk about southern Damascus. Forget Daraa, okay, down near the Golan Heights. That's when Israel has become more belligerent and letting everybody know that they don't want the Syrians taking that territory back. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. Because if the Russians really do bring S-300s into theater, then there's not going to be a lot that the Israeli Air Force can do about it at that point. And they're going to lose a lot of planes. So that's where things stand from that perspective. But it's really obvious to me that the militaries don't want confrontation between the U.S. and Russia. They understand that the political imperatives surrounding any kind of clash that way will force the hands of both President Trump and President Putin, because there are hardliners on both sides. U.S. neocons, and anybody thinks that Putin is a strongman or a horrible and a horrible warmonger, you have no idea what's standing behind him. Okay? And you do not understand what's happening within what exists and what realities exist within Russian politics. Because this is why Putin doesn't have 90% approval rating. Because he isn't a hardliner when it comes to Russian pride. Okay? And a lot of hardline Russians just cannot handle the incessant humiliation and provocations by the United States and Europe, and want to strike back badly. If you do not believe me on this, go read the comments at places like Russia Insider or the Durin or the Saker, other places, especially Russia Insider. There's so many of them there that they respond to my article, read an article about Putin in there, read about Syria provocations, and go look at the comment threads and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, this is not an insignificant portion of the Russian population. They have their political attitude. That position has its political attitude. So, and obviously the neoconservatives here in the United States are unrepentant warmongers and iPhone bombardiers, who they are. So now the question is, that's the case. Now what? Well, what happens next is the Syrian army will will continue to clean up the Syrian countryside as a kind of olive branch to the Israelis. They're not going to clean up Daraa yet. They're working on they're going to work on everything else other than Daraa. I was actually figuring that they would if I were Assad, I would go right for Daraa. But I'm much more confrontational. I'm much more of an asshole. I like Trump would force the moment to its crisis and say, okay, what are you willing to do? Because this is going to be cleaned up. We can clean it up now in April, or we can clean it up in June or July or whenever. Let's clean it up now. If that's strategically the best move for us to make, that's tactically the best move for us to make, that's what we should do. Anybody who thinks that Assad is a monster needs to understand in context what it means for him to not go and retake Daraa at this point in time. Now, yes, is he getting advised by the Russians and the Iranians to not, poke the Israelis in the eye? Of course he is. And yes, I did say the Russians and the Iranians. Because, believe me, Soleimani, the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who's in Syria, fighting alongside the Syrian Arab Army and the Russians and advising them, is no dummy. And if you want a path to an end to the theocracy in Iran, I think it goes to Soleimani. I have to start really thinking about it. I was having a discussion with somebody about this the other day, and they brought that up. I hadn't really thought about it. I think it's a very, very salient point. So The last thing to talk about then, relative to Russia, obviously, is this insanity from the Democrats. Filed a lawsuit. I mean, filed a lawsuit, for Christ's sake. Suing WikiLeaks, Trump campaign, the Russians, and some other people, and some other random people. I'm sure they could have sued me if they wanted to. For interfering with the U.S. elections and costing them a victory. Are they that desperate for money? Are they that poor that they think they can squeeze some money out of WikiLeaks or whomever in time for the midterm elections? Or is it simply, and obviously that's not the case, but that's really because there's no way a lawsuit like this would get settled in time for them to have any money to spend on the midterm elections, because that money has to be there now for them to make the ad buys in July through whatever. I mean, it's not possible. They're behind the fundraising curve for right now. Then this is their big fundraising effort for 2020, not for the midterms. And I just have to say to myself, are you insane? Or is it simply that you have to continue to go bigger while everything collapses? With the news this morning that Rudy Giuliani is joining Trump's legal team, you should, in order to end the Mueller investigation, I'm sure that's part of the reason, that's part of the counter move here. And they want to make headlines, and they want to keep their base energized for the midterms. The last thing to talk about, which is like the best news of the week, is Hungary is going to pass their anti-NGO law. George Soros is going to have to move his NGO's operations out of Hungary and into Germany. He'll fight it. He'll complain about it. He'll whine about it. He'll wonder why he can't get it all done that he wants to get done. Take over the world. The man with the God complex just got thrown out of Hungary. Viktor Orban is winning in a way that is going to reshape Eastern. Mark my words. That guy's awesome. All right. If you liked what you heard today, I would appreciate a subscribe. Great. You at least give a like so that it propagates through places like Twitter and Facebook. And if you do subscribe, remember to go into your settings to set up alert notifications so that you can get notified when I go live next, so we can have a conversation. Right? What else do we have? So, pretty much all I got this afternoon. I hope you guys appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And have a good afternoon. I'll be on Periscope tonight at 9 o'clock. Keep your stick on the ice.